So everybody, welcome to the next installment of the Mesmer Research Group guest speaker series. Today we have Dr. Javier Calvo-Amodio from Oregon State, and he will be presenting over the design of purposeful human activity systems, systems theory informs systems practice. And I will go ahead and hand it over to him.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Amelia. Well, welcome everybody, and thanks for coming. And the reason that feel free to leave your cameras on, and I actually prefer so that we can have a little more of an exchange. I can monitor the chat constantly if you have questions, if you don't feel comfortable asking questions and verbally, but also if at any point you want to ask a question, just raise your virtual hand, and then I can stop anytime, because this is going to be, I mean, it's a lot that we need to cover, and I'm trying to give it as, I try to make it as high level as possible, but because of that, there might be some things that are not very precise, or I'm not going to any details. So feel free to ask questions when that happens. All right. So yeah, this is a mouthful, right? But what does it mean? And that's what I'm going to illustrate throughout the whole presentation. All right. So let's start here. So to me, at the end of the day, do I have a success story already to tell you or not? And I'm putting it with a question mark is because we're still in the middle of doing it. But I think I already have, or my research group and I already have enough evidence that, yeah, this might end up being, that this approach will work. And all this is encompassing a very unique research experience, and I'll tell you why that is unique as we progress. So first of all, for me, it's been a journey to get to the point to have this theory of a purposeful human activity system, right? And how they are in action, how they come into action. I mean, even since my college years in the late 1990s, I started learning about systems theories and applied systems methodologies, right? And ever since, I've been trying to apply it here and there in professional working experience, and then of course now as faculty. Now, in particular, as faculty, I've had the chance to be a little more rigorous on how I go about it. And I've been developing or applying versions or evolutions of what now is the purposeful human activity systems theory. But everything in the past was just very focused on maybe just manufacturing operations within a small metals manufacturing around the area or valleys, or Boeing Portland, or for instance, geometronics unit in Oregon Department of Transportation, or even here at OSU just to assess student well-being in athlete operations. Right? It's been like piecemeal here and there. Now, in 2018, I started this unique opportunity, which is really also, it's unique in many different ways. One is because it's within the university, right? It's not with an external partner, which universities usually don't hire their own faculty to help. They usually hire consultants. So that is the first thing that is interesting. And yes, hire in the sense that, yeah, they're paying, it's a funded research project. And this has been with the Division of Finance and Administration in particular, which is when the university think of everything that makes the university run, that is not teaching classes or research. Anything else that is not academic, that's it. So from facilities, groundskeeping, sewage, sporting events, housing, human resources, everything you can think of, right? Now, what is really interesting is that it's a very diverse and complex organization, right? And this has enabled a very comprehensive redesign of all the processes, culture, structure, with a total engagement of more than 700 employees. And also those 700 plus employees have the goal of servicing over 30,000 stakeholders, which are comprised students, faculty, and staff. I mean, it's a really unique experience, and we're working at it as we go. And they've been patient enough to understand that this is a research project. It's not consultancy, so it takes time, and they enable the space to create or develop theories and test implementation, right? So we have testing groups or training groups where we fine-tune the approaches and methodologies and so on and so forth, and then we move forward. All right, just to give an idea of how diverse it is, I'm just showing to you the organizational chart, and you'll see that there's the various roles or functions, right? You have budget and resource planning, and they have to coordinate with the provost, right? You have a special project management office that actually can it's an offshoot of this project, and they see the framework for success, which is part of this project, and Beaver Works is the other part of this project, and they have other projects. They don't have the associate vice president for administration that oversees a lot of stuff like public safety, which we have an internal public safety office, insurance risk management services, health and safety, information technologies, what do you call it, UFIO, which is Universal Facilities Infrastructure and Operations. As you can see, we have all kinds of employees and contexts, right? There have people that are very hands-on, they're doing groundskeeping or fixing the physical plant, or we have HR dealing with people and very complex process, or the controller that also looks into payrolls and managing financial resources. So it's very office-oriented, groundwork oriented, or physical work. So it's everything from blue collar all the way to knowledge workers and everything in between. If we use that, which I don't necessarily like too much that classification, but I'm just using it right now for lack of better terms to explain it, right? So as you can see, it covers a lot of ground. And that's part of the trick, because current models or models that we can see in literature, they don't necessarily work for all kinds of operations. They're well suited for one or two, but not for everything. And that's usually where they fail. And there are no clear ways on how to design it and how to manage beyond one being developing the experience throughout many years and becomes more like an art form. Now, what's been the timeline? So the concept really started in fall 2017 because they did some, they hired Baker Tilly and they did a report, right, a consultancy report. But then in 2018, that's when I met the VP of Finance Administration, Mike Green, and in the fortuitous encounter, that's where starting envisioning and planning this. We, in 2019, we started developing the risk appetite statements and also the guiding principles. And then the rest of the structure has been working throughout the 2020. And of course, that slowed us down a little bit because everybody knows why, and especially Oregon State went completely remote. So that took a little bit of time to redesign a lot of the work so that it will work remotely, so that it could be effective while working remotely. So we had to take some steps back. And right now we're at a point where we're already developing the specific metrics to individual units. And this will make more sense once I show you this whole structure on how everything scaffolds down all the way to the units. And when I'm talking about the completion of phase implementation of metrics, that's end of 2021, but it's really fiscal year 2021. So that means in June 2022. Now, for all of these, in anything that you want to do in any organization to change, and it doesn't matter if you're a systems engineer, you want to implement new processes or whatever it is, you have to have buy-in. And we hear this over again, right? But it is, and it sounds really cliche, but it's absolutely true. You need to get the buy-in from everybody, all the different levels on the organization, and you need to have a design that actually helps you get the buy-in that you need, right? So the design needs to make sense to executives, but also to individual contributors or subject matter experts and supervisors and senior leadership. It needs to make sense to everybody, and that is very difficult to achieve. But let me give you some testimonies so far. And by the way, these testimonies are, even though I put in quotes, but they're not exactly their quotes, I'm paraphrasing just for space, and I edited a little bit so that they made a little more sense within. But for instance, individual contributors in general, and just right now, we have met pretty much with all 700 employees. And these are some of the things that we can extract from them. So one thing that has been very important for them is that they now understand how they contribute to OSU success. Because you saw the great variety of the organizations, sometimes they're so isolated that it's very hard to connect to the mission of a university. I don't know, for instance, the leasing office, because sometimes we have extension offices and all that, they just focus on getting the right type of building and negotiating contracts and so on and so forth. They're so far removed from the classroom that they have a hard time even connecting. Even within DFA, the function is so different than everything else. But now they start seeing the structure, start seeing where they fit within the rest. That has been engaging for them, right? They know where they fit within the Division of Finance Administration or DFA. Also, they have started to identify that with the ability that they'll have now to develop, to report data, to collect data, and so on and so forth, their life is going to be easier. Their contributions will be more valued because we'll have clear communication systems to handle that, right? And they also feel that there's a resource, there's a means for them to be heard when they need help, because we've been discovering a lot of things that could have been working better, and they've been like that for 20 years and nobody questioned it. And now people are starting to question, or they're starting to realize, oh, now I can convey this and people are actually listening. So it's been really interesting, a lot of changes. Middle managers, supervisors, the first two are basically the same thing. They see the same thing, but they also see, oh, now I'll have a better basis to justify asking for additional resources to improve my operations, or so on and so forth. They also like that their own teams have ownership of their own metrics. They're not being dictated by the executive or by the top brass. No, while there's a line, and I'll explain how that works, they have quite a bit of flexibility in determining what is it that is important to them, how is it that they're contributing to our overall mission of the university. Now, senior leadership, this is something, the first comment is a really interesting one. Last year, when we came to shut down and contact tracing was important, OSU launched a really interesting initiative. It's called the trace testing to do contact tracing, COVID infections. And that has been managed by College of Science. They got a large grant and so on and so forth. But since it was so quick, if we would have already some aspects of the framework implemented, like risk appetite statements and the principles and so forth, it would have been almost impossible to get all the structures internally to do it as fast and execute as fast as it was. Because OSU used to be a very risk-averse university or organization. And this is something that we keep on hearing from the Dean of College of Science. They also see this as a very comprehensive, useful framework. They see that now it's a common approach, but that enables a flexibility. And they also see that the change is being led through metrics, right? No, it's not the only instance, but the metrics play a very important role on promoting and enabling and change and empowering employees. Now, the executive level, they say that they will enable them to tell a comprehensive story. And this comes from Mike Green, the Vice President of Finance Administration, Mike Green, because when we were starting all this, he was meeting with the university president at that point, with Ed Ray, and Ed Ray asked him, so how are you doing? Referring, how is the division doing, right? And Mike says, well, I could have just answered that. There were two ways I could answer that. How am I doing personally? And I can tell him a lot of stories. But then how are we doing as an organization? I could just give him anecdotes. There was no robust data that could tell a comprehensive story, right? Now, also the vice president for marketing communications or public relations, and this was just yesterday because we're doing some outreach sessions, told us that he really loved the marketing, the framework, how it integrates everything that is about all that is important to us, your success. That's very important because he deals a lot with, he has a really broad perspective of everything. in that part, that has also resulted in other divisions, even the office of the provost and all that, to try to develop something similar. Well, anyway, that's all. That sounds awesome and whatnot, but okay, what makes it work that way? What came behind it? Well, I use systems theories as my focus, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean that everything that is being used are system theories per se or recognized as such, but I use a systems perspective. That means defining everything as a system, and that helps me see interconnections and manage the complexity. So the research problem for me and how I've defined it is, okay, how to design a sustainable organization or a system that is capable of adapting to changing circumstances. And that is something that is natural, not something that needs to be forced or has to be a Herculean effort by everybody. Okay, now everybody stop doing what you're doing. Let's focus on this, because probably if you have experience in management, yeah, I'm pretty sure you've never seen that. But trust me, that happens a lot. Now, that organization also needs to be able to change its culture towards one of flexibility, collaboration, accountability, and empowerment. That's key, and that's necessary right nowadays. And also capable of integrating all its processes in a coherent framework while retaining individual independence and flexibility. But everything needs to be integrated. Now, why I say that this is a systems problem? Well, first of all, because I have defined everything within DFA as a system, a purposeful human activity system. But then again, it is systemic. Why? Because there are parts that interrelate, right? Things that come together and create certain behaviors. There's complexity present because there are different levels of kinds of problems and interactions between the problems or processes or solutions and expectations and so on and so forth. And it's also holistic because there are emergent structures based on what exists right now or what will exist, emergent behaviors, processes, meanings, and within meanings are expectations, perceived value, and so on and so forth, right? Engagement with the organization, right? Now, to handle such a complex set of circumstances, we usually, I like to use a multi-methodological approach. That this is based on critical systems practice from Mike Jackson at the University of Hull. And what he says is that right now, the modern world exhibits VUCA characteristics, right? That means the modern world exhibits volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, right? That's just the way it is. So we need an organization that can handle it, right? That is flexible, that can adapt, that can do all those things. Now, the problems within the VUCA characteristics will be systemic and very likely also holistic. Now, within those, it's not often clear which approach we should use, right, to solve these problems. We may have several problems, symptoms of several behaviors, processes, meanings, and structures that might not obviously see how they relate to each other. But we may have more than two root causes. We will have root causes, right, that will interact with each other. And that becomes extremely difficult. And this is connecting back to methods for doing organizational culture or design organizations what exists right now. They're not very good at handling this level of complexity. Not by themselves. You usually need to combine things, but there's no clear how to combine things. So a multi-methodological approach will we need to appreciate the diversity of existing approaches, right? Of everything from optimization, regression models, all the way to methodologies to handle power differentials and everything else in between, right? And that includes having that critical awareness of the theories, methodologies, methods, and tools. Now, even though I'm saying multi-methodological, really what I mean is theories, methodologies, methods, and tools, but it was very difficult to have all that. So just give me that. I asked for a little bit of lenience on the semantic expression, but you just not have something too long. But then on that critical awareness, we need to be aware of what are the strengths of those existing approaches, the weaknesses, the complex dependencies. And this is very important because although all existing methodologies were developed by some academics or practitioners with that particular context in mind, trying to solve a particular problem. And that doesn't mean that particular methodology will always apply to everything. So we need to be aware of that. We also need to be aware of the cadence of the events in the organization, right? Or the cadence of the organization, because then the design has to be cohesive, coherent with that, or commensurate with that. Then we need to understand what is executive, managerial, and employee commitment or awareness for the need of change. This is not going to work if nobody's interested, right? Or if some are interested or are not. But the most important thing is there needs to be certain level of interest and needs to be equal, fairly aligned, or the alignment should be comparable, right? The level of interest. Otherwise, this is not going to work. Now, I keep on talking about, well, what is the critical awareness? What are the strengths, weaknesses, context dependencies of the methods that exist? Well, Mike Jackson also provides a great way to look at it. It's what he calls a systems methodologies, although we can assign any methodology here. It just, we use the systems methodology because we try to define everything as a system, right? And what we need to think of is that there's a system complexity component and it's a stakeholder relationship component. The system complexity, that can be simple, not the interactions are obvious, not much there, more like complicated. Then we have complicated systems and complex systems. The stakeholder relationships can be unitary, where everybody agrees what the problem is, what the solution is. Then we have pluralist relationships where there are diversity of opinions about what the problem might be or what the solution might be, different interpretations. And then we have coercive, and where there's something that's preventing a solution or for everybody to come together, right? So, for instance, if we have a problem that is simple and unitary, usually we're dealing with a technical complexity, something we can solve with technical knowledge. But for instance, if we have a problem that's pluralist and complex or complicated, we're dealing with people complexity, right? And power complexity, it applies to everything in coercive, right? That's just what it is. Right. So here at DFA, just to give you an example or try to clarify a little bit more what I'm talking about here, is that we deal with processes, systems, and problems that fall within all system complexities that we see in this framework, right? Everything. It has everything. So for instance, facilities will deal with technical complexity mostly, but not only that, but that's kind of what they do day in, day out. And they are doing safety assessments for OSHA regulations and so on and so forth. This can be fairly technical. They just need to go and measure how many contact strips, or well, how many outlets are in the wall, how far are they from the floor. I mean, just fairly straightforward. And if it's not, well, you just need to move it, right? Structural assessments for buildings and so on and so forth, layout optimization of classrooms or buildings or whatever you need to do. Human resources, it deals a lot with power complexity, right? When there are grievance resolutions or labor relations, faculty and student unions, that's a lot of power relationships, right? It's very complex. Or grants accounting, for instance, will deal with people complexity and organizational complexity. Why? Because funding agencies, they have their specific requirements. PIs, we tend to be very finicky creatures, so they also need to handle this with care. And college and grant cycles management, that is also very different, because College of Forestry is very different, College of Engineering, or College of Science, or College of Liberal Arts. The volume and cadence of the grants and so forth is very different. So there's not a single solution or a single approach that can solve all this, or how we bring things together, right? Or different methodologies. That's what multi-methodological approach is. And then we need to acknowledge that there are differences, and we need to have the right tool for the job. But how you bring all the tools together, that's the trick. And not only how to bring them together, but how to keep a beacon, so we don't get lost in the day-to-day operations and lost track of where we're heading. That nothing actually out there tells us how to do that, or provides a good framework to keep us steady and focused. So from the research perspective, I've had to draw all the way from philosophical methods, scientific methods, engineering, and practice. So everything comes together. And that's part of what makes this research very unique, right? So need to come all the way from reflection period principles to have done a comprehensive critique of the methods that exist out there, understanding where they fall, the theories, but also where the applications fall through, where they fail. Research principles to find the patterns and so on and so forth. Design principles to try to think of what is the solution, what can we design, and how can we guide the design of a new organization, and then how will you implement it, right? So it encompasses all of that. And the cool thing about this is that as we start approaching, we also enter into loops to refine each one of these methods, right? And this project has enabled all these. Now, that framework, the first thing it needs to do is to develop a theory that will guide all these implementations, right? So after all the analysis, I discovered that, well, you know what, the Bible system model from Stafford Beer is a really good model because it provides control mechanisms, but it's not very good at dealing with people. But I can use elements of that or cybernetic management to inform an aspect of what the framework or what the purposeful human activity system will be. Then I had to develop, or I was not necessarily develop, but I stood on the shoulders of Churchman, Vickers, Checkland to clarify what a human activity system is, because to them the main differences for them is a constructivist perspective, meaning that human activity systems only exist in the mind of the systems analyst, whereas I am more of a modern realist perspective, or realist perspective. Said no, the human activity systems exist both in real world, and then we model them in our minds. And the value of our models in the minds relies on how well they describe the real world system. And then it's also about our ability to capturing and understanding the real world system. So they are not just a construct of our imagination, they do actually exist. And that is a key distinction on how we treat this, because then this is not just something that is ancillary to what we're doing, it is part of what we're doing. And that's how we must interpret this. But when I put these two together, we get a more complex system, and that's when it becomes a purposeful human activity system, because with a purpose, then we can implement control mechanisms, but also we deal with systems with purpose, the boundary, context, languages, and many other things. I will explain this model in a moment where it comes. So that's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to show you this, what these elements mean. And it's really quick, right? Because Biosystem, there are books on it, and it's a very complete theory. It's amazing. So I highly recommend at some point when you read that, but let's just start with this. So it is based on three elements of an organization: the operation, the meta system, and the environment. By the way, Stafford Beer used an analogy to the nervous system, central nervous system in our bodies, right? So the operations are all the organs, everything that works. The meta system is the brain and the cerebellum, everything that controls and dictates policies of how everything needs to behave. The environment is everything that we interact with, right? That's it. So in an organization, the operation are those primary activities that your organization performs, right? And those are usually found in departments, units, and so on and so forth. They might be cross-departmental, cross-unit, cross-functional, but we need to identify those, and we need to have a way to focus our attention on those things that are important in the operation. The meta system is the one that makes sure there's coherence between all these subsystems. They need to work in a harmonious, integrated whole, right? Think of those organizational policies, the system architecture itself, and so on and so forth. And then the environment is everything that's outside the system of interest, but that affects or can be affected by our system, right? Customers, suppliers, even Congress, I mean, whatever it is, right? These three elements interact to what? to have organizational control, that vertical control that provides a coherence and control over the managerial process and all that. We need to have that in any organization. I mean, it cannot be completely void of that regulation. But at the same time, we also want to enable operational independence to maximize autonomy and flexibility, right? The goal is, how do we balance that? It's an optimization problem at the end of the day, right? We need to balance those two aspects. We don't want organizations, the individual organizations or subsystems to be too independent, because then there's no cohesion and each one of them ends up doing whatever they want. But also we don't want to be too rigid that then they cannot adjust to specific conditions. An example, business centers that exist in each one of the 11 colleges, although some colleges were sharing business centers, so there are 7 business centers. Each one of them grew organically to react to the needs of each one of the college. But then once you need to process something centrally, it was extremely difficult because each business center were doing things however they want. Now, does this mean that 100% of everything will be consistent or standardized? No, but it's 70, 80% of everything that is done is very similar. So that can be make very consistent across all business centers, and then just handle the exceptions and have a way to handle the exceptions. That's a quick example of what I'm talking about here. Now, the human activity system model, what it means. At the end of the day, I coined principles that guide from a vertical perspective, what is it that we need to consider when thinking or designing a human activity system, right? And these guides, these principles are the rules that guide our judgment making and action taking within a given context for a particular purpose. So the first thing, human activity systems have parts. Okay, yes, we need to think about the parts. What are those parts? They can be conceptual or concrete. So what are examples of concrete parts? What are examples of conceptual parts? The parts will interrelate to produce persistent structures, behaviors, process, meanings. And those interrelations are also conditioned by the kind of the system, its capability, and the structure. So then we start thinking of all those elements and start making analysis of the organization according to these relationships and start identifying those. Now, the key part here is that human activity systems, they all exist to fulfill a purpose or a set of purposes. And this is a very important insight. That's what separates a human activity system than any other kind of system. And that is the awareness of their purpose and the ability or willingness to pursue that purpose intentionally. A rock might have a purpose, but doesn't have the ability, and I doubt that they're aware of the purpose. It's more like something we assign to it, depending on certain things, right? But when we come together and form a human activity system, it's because we have something in common, a goal to pursue, a purpose to pursue. Whether it's to play a soccer match or to climb Mount Everest or whatever it is, or to work on a project. I mean, there's a purpose, and that's what gets us together, right? So that is how we can also assess what will be the causal powers. That means the resources to fulfill the purpose. We make sure that the human activity system design will help us achieve the purpose, and also make sure that everybody understands what the purpose and everybody agrees with it. So once we start thinking about it, we can think of ways in which we can achieve this. Now, we also need to think about the boundaries. And this is very important. We need to understand the concept of holon, because a purpose of human activity systems is a holon. That means it's a system that's embedded in larger systems that is comprised of smaller systems. So a system, even though it emerges, but it's also, it has to submerge to the environment. The environment will limit how much you can do, right? Because there might be rules, regulations, or laws, and so forth. You cannot do just whatever you want. Even the purpose itself might limit that. But also, a system can influence its environment. Can we enact change? How can we benefit? Once we think of those things, we will start seeing the potentials, and or identify whether at this point it can be done or not. And also, the context and language modulate the relationships in the human activity system. So what I mean by this, so the context itself will let us know what is possible, right? Because if we're in the military, typical examples, military, if times of peace, there's a lot of structure and you need to follow certain things that need to happen. I mean, you cannot deviate, but then when you're in operational theater, I mean, when you're in action, there's a lot more flexibility. The context changes and the system changes, all behavioral structures and everything else. That's a simple example, but I think it illustrates what I'm talking about here. Now, the language itself is also important, because if people don't understand the same things or out of a given term, or they use completely different terms to describe the same thing, it becomes very difficult to communicate and to break organizational barriers and to enable collaboration across units or departments. So you also do that analysis. Now, that's what gives rise to this model. So now, this model, at the end of the day, I like to describe what is a successful purposeful human activity system. And that will be a stable system that has low entropy, that will maintain a tractable progress trajectory to achieve their goals or their purpose, right? That means that that system will maintain homeostatic control. That means if we design the right kind of system with the right kind of structure, it's going to have a stable trajectory towards its purpose, right? Even if there are disturbances, the system will have the tendency to go back into this trajectory and self-correct without having to add much. This is what we usually right now call resiliency, but I think resiliency has been misused quite a bit, but this will be the closest. And also a homeostatic state. Nothing is steady, right? I mean, there's going to be fluctuations, and we need to just know what is acceptable fluctuation in the behavior of the organization. And this is possible when the purpose is well understood by all the parts, and especially the humans, and the causal powers needed to conduct those purposeful activities are present. Because if you want to get to Mount Everest, but we never exercise and we're deadly out of shape, that's never going to happen, right? Well, we could hire a helicopter and be placed on top, right? Maybe, but then maybe it's not very efficient. But at the end, but you get my point. So what happens here? This also draws on Deming. And something that I can distill from what Deming says is that we manage what we can control, right? That's when we can manage, but we control only that we can measure, and we can only measure that we understand. So everything goes back into, do I understand what I do and how I'm fit within the organizational goal? If so, let me see what I need to measure so that I show how I contribute. And if I can start seeing how I'm contributing, then I can find ways to control if I'm not doing well or if I'm deviating. And then I can start planning, I can manage, right? So at the end of the day, we need to understand what we do and the impact on the larger organization, right? That's it. So in this case is, okay, how are we doing, right, with an organization? And we can do it or I think in many organizations, we can do it through the performance of key activities. Now, as I said, human activity systems are that special kind of system that they are aware of the purpose and intentionally pursue that purpose, right? If we do that, then we can guide behavior and resource allocation. We can then design and determine what are the right system capabilities, and we can delimit also the potential emergence of unwanted properties, behaviors, structures, and so on and so forth. That can be illustrated, and this comes from Vickers, these two strands. I adapted the work from Jeffrey Vickers and also Peter Checking. And basically we need to see, it's a two-strand of interactions between happenings, what we do, and the ideas, what we think about what we do, or we should be doing. And that's what they call the flow or the flux of every day, right? It happens every day. In our case, at DFAs, okay, how are we doing? At the end of the day, that's the purpose. But we want to get to a point that everything's aligned. The amplitude and the frequency of these interactions needs to be, of the happenings and ideas need to be aligned. Because in many cases, if we're talking about the stable trajectory, if we don't have a good alignment, it might not be that it's going in the right direction. So sometimes we might want to reduce that amplitude. In other cases, and this is very common in organizations, there's a lot of doing, but not that much thinking, and this is not good either. Okay. So bottom line, if there's a discrepancy or a change, we need to have a mechanism to pick a sign. And a sign in this case is a bit of information that tells us something about the state of the system. And if we can pick that sign and we can analyze what caused the change, then we can find a way how to take action and apply causal powers to correct the behavior or the structure or whatever caused this change in the flow of everything, on the flux of everyday life or our daily cadence. And at this point now we can add more elements. So we will need, first of all, a set of guiding principles that reflect what the organization wants to do, right? Now, as we pick the sign, that in organizations, the most common way of or a version of a sign are metrics. Those metrics can be judged according to what the strategic plan or what is the organization thinks that is important, and then we can discern what can be done. We make a decision to act. We can then fight to have the right or find the causal powers. We apply them, and things get better. And the principles get updated because we need to be learning. There's always enable organizational learning. There's always a way to get better. Mm-hmm. So that's it. That's all the theory. Let me show you the example of what we've done. For us, we call it the Division of Finance Administration, or the DFA framework for success. And this is a comprehensive approach to supporting informed and transparent decision-making across the Division of Finance Administration for the benefit of the university. And it has three elements. It has its guiding principles, the key performance indicators and their key activities, and the division-wide and then unit level metrics. That's bottom line what it is comprised of. And as you'll see right now, language will start changing of everything I'm saying, because this is a language unique to OSU. And this is what we mean standardizing. So from this model, let's see. First thing we needed to develop were the guiding principles. And with the purpose in mind to answer the question, how are we doing? We looked into the OSU mission, its vision, its core values, and the strategic plan 4.0. And the leadership decided to adopt this. DFA, until then, they had their own mission and vision and their own strategic plan. They said, no. If we want to truly help or serve the university, we should have our own stuff, because that silos what we do. So let's adopt that. And then we had several discovery sessions where we started generating those principles and instilling the institutional wisdom. What is it that we want to do, and where are things that we could do better, but also what are the things that we do well, or the things that we like when they work well, what principles will reflect that. Mm-hmm. That took about 6 months. We had 6 senior leadership members, and they also work with extended leadership team with an extra 13 members. So we try to capture as many voices within DFA. And right now, as a matter of fact, we've been in outreach sessions, reaching out to deans and to provost, to university president, and other parties outside DFA to receive feedback. So these ones might change a little bit. But at the end of the day, what this means is that, okay, we have our core values, which are accountability, diversity, integrity, respect, and social responsibility. And the principles are framed by those, right? I'm not going to go through all of them, but just to give you, but what I want to highlight here is that very rarely a single principle will be what we need. You usually will be using more than one principle all the time. And to give you an idea, for instance, process consistency balanced with flexibility improves efficiency and effectiveness might need to be used with assessing and managing risk, balances innovation compliance, and probably also with clearly defined integrated policy standards and processes that remove institutional bias, coupled with appropriately delegated authority, empowers employees, and improves the satisfaction of all stakeholders. Yes, that's a mouthful, but there's a holistic principle. We've tried to break apart, but it doesn't work. We might find a way how to simplify it, but not yet. But that's always something in the back of our minds. Okay, so that's the principles. Now, how do we perceive those concerns? Well, after that, we decided, well, we need to come up with key performance indicators, which are ideals, right? And we landed with people, operational excellence, safety, risk, and sustainability infrastructure. This is what is important to DFA. But then, okay, so how do we measure the performance of this? Well, through metrics. But Jesus, people is way too broad. I mean, it's a good thing to focus on, but what do we mean by people? What do we mean by safety? What am I going to measure? And here's where one of the biggest insights of this project came. Oh, we need to have key activities that help focus what people means. And then we attach an activity to people, then I know what I need to measure. Because then what I'm measuring is a reflection of performance of that key activity. Okay, so what we did, well, we paired the KPIs with their key activities. So for instance, people right now, what is important at this point, I always use to attract, develop, and retain excellent and diverse people. Or in safety, seek to provide health, safety, and well-being of our community. And by the way, we channel our inner lawyers by saying seek to provide health instead of just to provide health, but that's probably going to change. But anyway, this helps us focus. And guess what? Then we were able to identify DFA level metrics. But now, the problem here is that is every single unit in the university supposed to report on all these metrics? Well, I'm glad you asked. And the answer is no. The cool thing here is that then each unit can identify the metrics to which they best contribute towards, and they can identify the key activity that they perform that or design an activity that reflects best how they contribute towards that metric, to the DFA level metric, and then they can establish their own performance metrics, how well they are performing that activity in which they contribute. And that is what enables that organizational flexibility, but we still have the control. That was a huge insight, and it has been working fantastically because we have we have 85 unit metrics at this point out of 21 different units, and everybody has very specific ones, and we have a way how to roll them up by normalizing the scores. So we're in the process of developing the dashboards to report everything. And these are, well, this is what we saw right now, right? But this is just so you can see it. But I'm not going to spend too much time here. I will explain how this works. Now, all this is internal, and that's cool. It makes sense. We can say fairly well to all DFA employees. But do these metrics make sense, or the framework make sense to everybody outside? And that's why we're doing those external meetings. Saying this we've been showing it all over the place. So I apologize if this offends somebody, but just keep in mind there are stuff toys, right? But at the end of the day, it's something that we need to be aware of. That even if it looks great for us, it might not look great to others. So now we're in that process of fine-tuning things so that everybody is on board. Now we're getting external buy-in on the metrics and what we're doing. Finally, because you will say, okay, well, all that is cool, you develop all these, you've done all that, but then how do you implement it? Well, how do we do that? This is the best way I come to visualize this, because we have a lot of the individual units that will have to shepherd throughout the process, right? They develop the metrics, they implement them, they start measuring, they start making decisions, start managing, so on and so forth. How do we do that? They need to adopt the new framework, and then we need to do this in a scaffolded approach. Well, that means setting different stages so we know where they are. And the colors are just typical lean manufacturing. That's it, nothing else. Doesn't mean that being in the red, you are about to be fired. That's not it. And that's been a key thing. We've been encouraging units to set up the metrics that they're important, even if they're in the red, it doesn't matter. The whole point is that you need to start improving. So once we start deploying this, we're going to have stages in which all the teams will go through. Now, keep in mind that stage 4, like cells, is a little of a nirvana state, but that doesn't mean that it's not achievable. But the way to unlock that level, so to speak, is through time, sustained performance over time, or sustained accomplished performance over time. Once there's no need to put extra energy, that becomes the new normal, you're at Excel. But then what is going to happen here? And this is where we are right now. We have some teams. We not only we're learning, we're fine-tuning our methodology, we're there. And as we progress in the next year, or in this coming year, we'll start seeing all the teams move. And this is where we want to be in June 2022, sorry. Everybody has already started the process, right? Now, not everybody's going to be all the way accomplished because there are a lot of units that we don't even have the resources to collect the data. So those resources need to be created. We're changing systems. There's a huge investment in things that need to happen or that need to occur before we can get everybody to accomplish. But we're in the process of getting there. But okay, all this is cool and so on. But so what? Why should you care? Why is this interesting? Well, first of all, we're doing it in a practical application, developing theory and practice in a very complex system that is aching to operate in a city, right? It's that complex. And the system needs to be redesigned into a comprehensive and coherent, functional and viable organization that is not people dependent. If the vice president or vice president of finance administration leaves, it still needs to continue because that's another downfall of existing methods. If the leader that's been pushing for it leaves, it falls apart. No, this needs to be beyond that, and that's where we're heading towards. Let me give you a fun fact. Before we began the project, and this is when I did the OSU Athletics project, the baseball coaches or the director of operations of the baseball team, and I don't know if you're aware or not, but OSU's baseball team has won national championships in NCAA. So when they were in the NCAA national championship, they had to travel with cash because, oh no, you cannot have a per diem card because somebody 20 years ago stole $500 and now nobody has that. So they had to carry more than $20,000 in their backpacks. Imagine the risk. But there were a lot of blind spots and nobody was questioning it. And now we already redesigned the whole travel process. And now everybody can have a P card and we have a very good system to manage all travel and so on and so forth. There's a lot more flexibility, but it's a different level of accountability. Finally, I want to leave you with this thought. A clock is a system, right? But and its workings can be explained through reductionism. No problem. We can do that. We can understand exactly how everything works. Think of a mechanical watch, right? Now, on the other hand, a holistic approach to understand will help us understand why we need clocks and how the aesthetics of their design evolves over time. But both the reductionistic and the holistic approaches to explanation involve systemic arguments, not to worry about it, but each starts from different directions, bottom up and outside in. And they're both important and they need to coexist. That's why a multi-methodological approach. We use very specific mechanics, which are the metrics, but we have the framework principles that are more holistic that helps us assign meanings. That's how we can understand it. That's how we'll be getting all the buy-in that you saw. That's it. Questions? Sorry, I went way over, but.
You're fine. Thank you. That was very interesting. Does anybody have any questions?
I do. Yeah. So a few times in a few different places, you've talked about, making the system, maximal benefit to all stakeholders or something along those lines. Mm-hmm. With a system this big, with this many stakeholders, how do you handle, kind of competing desires of stakeholders? Because I imagine there's a lot of places here where not all of the stakeholders necessarily want the same thing out of that aspect of the system. Right.
Now that's a really good question. And that's basically through this conversion of the metrics, right? And that has been a very involved, it's taking us all about 6 meetings throughout, in each meeting's about every 2 weeks. So it's close to 3 months. Sometimes we can meet a little more frequently to determine their metrics and so that they feel that, okay, yes, this is something that reflects my interest, reflects what my unit is, but also I can see now how I fit within, because you cannot have people just completely going rogue and do whatever they want, right? At the end of the day, you're an organization, but it's first getting the buy-in for them to understand where they fit. And once they understand where they fit and how they contribute to the organization, then that comes into place. Now, will you have 100% agreement? No, I mean, that will be too naive to assume, but at least we get the majority. And there are other elements that we're starting to develop, right? And from next 2 years, that will be measuring peer influence, right? To identify when there are some deviations from that perceptions. And also there are other tools that will be measuring the level of engagement, right? Exactly that. So that the managers can identify if there's an issue and they can work with their teams to try to alleviate concerns and understand that, right? Because many times that happens because you're being neglected, because nobody's explaining to you how you fit, or you feel that your work is useless, it doesn't contribute. That, I'm not saying that's always the case, but that is fairly common. And at least that has been the case here at OSU for sure. Does that make, did I answer your question, Chris?
Yeah, you did.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we could spend 2 hours talking about this, but
yeah, I've got kind of a related question if no one else has any burning questions. Okay, I didn't hear anything. So you mentioned that from your perspective here, these systems exist in reality, and the purpose of these models is to meaningfully capture some characteristics of this system. I'm paraphrasing, but I think that's along the lines. With the system this large and this complex, and this is an issue that's, you know, a pretty common problem in systems engineering. How do you go about validating these models and determining how well you've captured, you know, this complex of a system? Because that's not trivial. Yeah.
No, I mean, that's something that's very important. That's why I said the engagement from all levels. And yes, the development is very involved. Not always hard. I mean, I spend way too many hours, and my grad students will spend way too many hours on this and talking to people. That's very important, talking to everybody, and not only us, because at the end of the day, we're consulting. The ownership is actually with the senior leaders and the managers, but you also need to see where they're getting stuck. And big part of it was creating a completely different environment where it's okay to speak up and nobody gets in trouble. That's very important. And also, as I said, those other mechanisms where we're going to be measuring patterns of behavior over time and interpretations on the value of the framework. Right, and that coined with this unit flexibility is getting there, and we'll have also some surveys or some ways to collect extra information, and lastly, also the progression throughout this model will tell us how they're doing. If a team is always getting stuck here or comes here and comes back, or they're stuck in the limbo and the transitions and they cannot get out of it, that's also an indication there's something wrong. They probably know good buy-in, they don't have the cost of powers. There's something going on there. And really the system doesn't have to be more complex beyond just saying, watch out, this is not working. It just needs to tell you that hey, there's an issue here. It's an alarm. Then it's up to managers and how the managers will train to be able to handle these issues. Because the system cannot handle everything, but at least can give you the warning signs, right? Hey, pay attention here. And then now, if the system persists, then it's up to the vice president and everybody else to ask, hey, why is this not helping, right? What can I do to help? What are the resources you need? What is missing? That's very important, the language. Instead of, you gotta make this work. Not that, no, you never do that, right?
Right. Thanks.
Oh, no, absolutely. Great questions, Christopher. Anybody else, or did either I wow you or I confuse you, or you're like that? Was I like crystal clear like milk or like water?
Definitely like water, crystal clear.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. And I mean, honestly, it's supposed to be simple, but obviously there's a lot behind it, right? I mean, this is just very superficial level, right? Because there's no time, but thank you. Anybody else? I think you already saw that arm bite. It's okay.
Any other questions?
I can come up with a third question if I need to.
Sure.
Go for it, Chris.
Okay, so in a lot of systems engineering situations, stakeholders are usually viewed pretty strongly tied to like traditional system performance metrics. It's kind of the stakeholders are the people that benefit from the system being good, and some methods at least kind of impose a lot of rationality on the stakeholders. With a situation like this where you've got, you know, high level employees, high level workers and analysts and stuff for whom that traditional approach might kind of fit, but you've also got a lot of low level workers being included who might really deviate. Kind of how do you handle that sort of like non-traditional engineering stakeholders in this sort of a systems engineering task?
Well, that is an excellent question. I mean, we'll have to analyze by using the principles to understand purposeful human activity principles to understand those relations, all right? And if they're power relations and so on, so forth, we need to understand what they are and then what elements need to be integrated into the system. But at the end of the day, everything is, if you need to have a specific function that will help you, I was going to say handle, but handle is not the right term, will help you engage with those specific stakeholders and integrate them, then you design that, right? I mean, that's part of it. It's not like your organization as it is perfect. If you need to come up with new designs and change the way you do things, yeah, that should be the ideal case, right? And then that might come in the form of a specific, I mean, if it's very important for the organization, then you probably want to, let me go to the, where is it? You might want to either put it as a key performance indicator, right? Stakeholder engagement. That's key. And then, okay, what will be the key activity? What is it that you want to achieve from it and how you're going to measure it? I mean, if it's that important, you put it here, right? Don't be shy about it. Yeah. If it's key, put it here. And then that places the focus on everybody. Okay, we need to make sure that we accomplish this. And then you empower people to find ways on how to improve that relationship.
Thank you. I think I'm tapped out now.
Okay.
I think that's all.
Fair enough. No, excellent questions. It's good.
Thanks. It's been really interesting answers.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, we are at time, so I will thank everyone for joining us. If you are interested in our previous speakers, please check us out at uah.edu/MRG. That is our website, and they're all on there. And thank you again for joining us, Dr. Calvo-Amodio.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it. And please feel free to contact me if you want to. If after 2 days you're like, yeah, I did have a question, shoot me an email. Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Excellent.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much for watching the latest installment in the Mesmer Research Group Guest Speaker Series. We really hope you enjoyed it. For more information about our research group or how to get involved, please check us out at uah.edu/MRG. We can also be found on LinkedIn, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more videos like this one.